Okay, so welcome everyone to another session of the virtual Kant Congress with a cosmopolitan purpose. And today it is our pleasure to receive the Romanian Kant Society, who will be curating a session on Kant in Romania. And the host of the session, who invited all the speakers and put the session together, is Rodica Croituru from the Romania Academy. And we thank you, Rodica, for putting the session together. And we are very much looking forward to the entire discussion. We would like just to remind you that if possible at all, if you could switch on your videos, your cameras, so that we can see each other and emulate the ambience of being in the same room. And we would also like to remind you that after the session, we usually leave the Zoom meeting, the session open. So for more informal conversations after the recording stops, and you're obviously all very much welcome to stay. And without further ado, I'll put the session to Rodica, who will host today. So thank you so much, Rodica. The floor.
Thank you, Luis and Karin. Thank you very much for your very necessary congress. And well, very interesting because we can know each other better. So I am pleased to open the session of the Romanian Kant Society in the framework of the virtual Kant Congress. We used to found the Romanian Kant Society in April 1990, after the Kant Congress in Bonn, the first one, not this one. Having the approval of Gerhard Funke, the president of Kant Gesellschaft at that time. Our organization became necessary due to preoccupation with Kant's philosophy since the 19th century, in translation studies, or lecture in high school classes. The aim of our society was to organize international symposia from the beginning to promote and encourage the preoccupation of the Kantian philosophy and to translate it into Romanian and to encourage the young generation to study Kant. Since now the main works are already translated. In 2007, I initiated the series of Kant's works into Romania on the Academy of Berlin edition, Akademie-Ausgabe, because in Romania, not only philosophers are interested in Kant, but learned people as well. More will be found from my colleagues. And because Titus Lates is the first speaker. He's a scientific researcher of the Institute of Philosophy and Psychology of the Romanian Academy. He holds FID from the University of Bucharest and is member of the Romanian Kant Society. He published a bibliographic study on Kant's translation into Romanian, published in a collective volume, Kant's Schriften in Übersetzungen, appeared in 2020 at Felix Meiner. As a matter of fact, he's archaeologist, a very good archaeologist of Romanian philosophy and mainly Kantian philosophy in bibliographic matters. Please, Titus, do your best.
Yes, thank you, and good morning and good afternoon for all. My presentation is just an introduction for this meeting, and I must go at 12:30. The start is with the first translator of Kant in Romanian, Gheorghe Lazar, the first translator of Kant's works in Romanian, one of the founders of higher education in Romania, who also taught courses of Kant logic and metaphysics in Bucharest. He was one who firmly initiated the Kantian tradition in Romanian education and culture. His translations have not been preserved. The first author, the first translator of Kant's work, of which the translation were preserved, is the great Romanian poet Mihai Eminescu, and he translated some substantial fragments from the Critic of Pure Reason, during his studies in Vienna and Berlin. The manuscripts that remained after his premature death were kept for a while by university professor Titu Maiorescu. Maiorescu himself translated some pieces of Kant's work for the courses of history of modern philosophy that he taught at the University of Iași and Bucharest. Fragments from Eminescu's manuscripts of translation of Kant, donated to the Romanian Academy by Maiorescu, were published on almost entirely, but not with great scrupulosity, in a volume with complete works. Just in 20th century, a scientific edition of Eminescu's translation from the Critic of Pure Reason was published after the manuscript kept at the library of the Romanian Academy. Kantian Readings, translation from Critic of Pure Reason, edited by Noica and Surdu, in the annex two fragments about space and time, translated by Titu Maiorescu. In this edition, the editors tried to reproduce the exact text of the translation in order to show the genuine corner of Eminescu's laboratory to the philosophers, linguist, and cultural historian. A first complete translation of Kant's works was a perpetual piece or philosophical sketch with a biographical note and an introductory word, translation by Ion Gorun, a Romanian writer and journalist who was translating Faust by Goethe from German. The translator does not indicate the edition after which he made the translation, probably the edition of Reclam's Universal Bibliothèque, because contains a biographical note and introductory word after Kelbach.
Titus, share the screen, please. Share the screen.
Huh? What?
Yeah, you forget.
Oh.
It happens.
A professional promoter of Kantianism in Romania was Rădulescu Motru from the Faculty of Philosophy and Letters
The
of
screen
the
still isn't
University of
being
Bucharest.
shared.
What?
It's
Were you
shared.
trying to share the screen? We can't see it.
You can share the screen. You did it first.
To see or no?
No,
No.
no. First you did it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's the same thing you did before, Titus.
Yeah, you did before.
Just click on this green button at the bottom of your screen where is written share.
I have another. I have not the bottom. It's full screen.
You cannot see it.
No.
It's okay.
I give up.
Have to exit
That's fine.
full screen to see the button. You have to exit full screen to see the button share screen, a green button.
You just open the Zoom. Yes.
Okay.
Perfect. Yes. Very good.
Yes.
Great. Yes. Can you try to put in presentation mode as you did before, or?
Yeah, I think it's expunere.
From Eminescu.
Or maybe you can go like this.
From Eminescu.
Yeah.
Is it okay or no?
It's good. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes, it's good.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, a professional promoter of Kantianism is in Romania was Rădulescu Motru from the Faculty of Philosophy, and who got his PhD in Leipzig with a thesis on Kant, and also he published a special volume with elements of metaphysics based on Kantian philosophy. Rădulescu Motru prefaced the volume of Kant, Religion Within the Limits of Reason, an anthology who also contains in selection the critique of practical reason, groundwork of metaphysics, and also in the same year, the Mihai Antoniade published the Immanuel Kant Prolegomene. The translator Antoniade got his degree in law and philosophy and was noted by Professor Maiorescu and Rădulescu Motru. The translation was made at the insistence of young academic Nae Ionescu. And the translate is published after the Academy of Science, the works, complete works of Kant, published by the Academy of Science of Berlin. Nae Ionescu also coordinated the translation of the text after the critique of practical reason, and Rădulescu Motru are here to one of introductory notes about Kant's life and on practical reason by Nae Ionescu. A programmatic translation of Kant's work, starting with the most important, was initiated in the 20th century by Traian Brăileanu, a professor at that time at the University of Cernăuți in Romania, then now in Ukraine. He studied in German at the Faculty of Philosophy of the University of Czernowitz before the fall of the Habsburg Empire. The first volume of translation is Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Moral. After this, he published The Critique of Pure Reason. In 1932, translated The Critique of Practical Reason, and it was not published because another translation, see below, was published by Amzer and Vișan. The work will be published posthumously in this century. Before the end of the war and under the aegis of the Romanian Academy, Brăileanu was only able to publish the critique of power of judgment after Kant, which had not yet been published entirely in Romanian. And in 40 years, Traian Brăileanu managed to publish in another volume about its perpetual peace, idea for universal history with a cosmopolitan purpose, answering the question, what is enlightenment, and the conjectural beginning of human history. Traian Brăileanu also translated on education, hoping to publish it after the war. From the translator note, we find out that the translation was made after German edited by Arstein. Brăileanu mentioned a translation published by Buțureanu, which is a translation from French. Another interviewer and translator was Constantin Noica, who translated inaugural dissertation De Mundi Sensibilis Atque Intelligibilis Formae Principiis of Kant, and in another volume, the first introduction to the critique of power of judgment. After the war, in communist era, the translation of Kant and especially those of Braileanu were kept on index for a while, and the copy that did not continue to be circulated in a restricted environment. When Kant returned to circulation, in order to prevent the attempt to use Braileanu's translation, the new regime sought to replace them with other translation, of course, invoking other reasons. Nicolae Bagdazar was asked to translate the Critic of Pure Reason, and a few years he would sign a new translation of the Critic of Pure Reason. 3 years later, the second volume of Kant is issued in Nicolae Bagdazar translation, Groundwork of Metaphysics of Moral, the Critic of Practical Reason. Contemporary translators are Surdu, Vasile Dem Zamfirescu, Mircea Flonta, Rodica Croitoru, Alexandru Bobog, Valentin Mureșan. Through their contribution, a series of Kant major works were translated. The Critic of Power of Judgment by Vasile Dem Zamfirescu and Alexandru Surdu, Prolegomena by Mircea Flonta, Perpetual Peace, Groundwork of Metaphysics and Moral, Critic of Practical Reason, The Critic of Pure Reason, and so by Rodica Croitoru. And the list of translation from Kant was completed with a new translation and work of small extent, including those from the pre-critical period, logic, the metaphysics of morals, religion within the limits of reason alone, anthropology, themes of spirit sphere, the universal natural history, and the commented edition, groundwork of the metaphysics of moral, translation and commentary coordinated by Mureșan. Today we have almost the entire work of Kant translated into Romanian, only that there is no mutual agreement in the unitary recognition of this translation. Thus, any research on Kant requires, as is natural, reference to the original text. There are variants and controversy over the translation. In order to solve many translation difficulties, in addition to the debate between Romanian translators, dialogue between translators in various other languages needed, so that international meetings like the one today are indispensable in this continuous work. Thank you, and I must go to the class, and good luck for all in this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Titus. And if somebody have question, please write us an information, send us a message, and they will come to the its author, to Titus Lateș. Next is our second speaker, Claudia Șerban, and still very young and anyway with a very important career. She's an associate professor in phenomenology at the University Jean Jaurès, Toulouse, and author of Phénoménologie de la possibilité, which appeared at Presse Universitaire de France in 2016. She also published papers on Kant's understanding of possibility, as well as on the relationship of Kant and Husserl, focusing mainly on the place and meaning of anthropology with respect to transcendental philosophy. She's also a member of the Romanian Kant Society. Please, Claudia, the microphone is yours because, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, dear Rodica, for your invitation. And I also would like to thank Karin Deber and Luis Felipe Garcia for the organization of this session. I won't be speaking myself directly about Kant in Romania. I will only begin by explaining how I joined the Romanian Kantian Society. It was after our first meeting, I think, Rodica, in 2010, and at the Kant Congress in Pisa in Italy. And we had other opportunities to meet afterwards, and the congresses of the French Kantian Society, in particular in Lisbon, in Luxembourg, and so on. As you recalled, I am a specialist mainly in phenomenology, and my main research today is carried in phenomenology since my PhD, but my very first research on Kant has always accompanied me ever since, and there are several ways through which I always go back to Kant. My first research on Kant was about the transcendental, his transcendental understanding, the transcendental meaning of possibility, and the various conceptions of possibility that one finds in critical thought. And after my PhD, I came back to Kant by examining mainly his the possible replies that one could give to the criticism that Kant has famously suffered from Husserl and from the standpoint of transcendental phenomenology. It is one issue in particular that has interested me since, the relationship between transcendental philosophy, be it in Kant and Husserl, and the scientificity of psychology and anthropology. This I would like today, I will try to sum up this research on transcendental philosophy, psychology, and anthropology for you, and thank you in advance for your attention. I will begin by noticing that transcendental philosophy, insofar as it values a pure non-empirical dimension of knowledge, whose origin is ultimately subjective, cannot avoid being confronted by the relationship between the transcendental I and empirical subjectivity, the latter considered in its dual psychological and anthropological dimension. If Kant and Husserl both elaborate a form of transcendental idealism, they assign a quite different function and consistency to internal or inner experience in relation to external or outer experience. This paper will examine their understanding of the nature and content of internal experience and their comprehension of what the outer human being, or the human being as being in the world, is in respect to transcendental subjectivity, in order to highlight the position of their transcendental philosophy towards psychology and anthropology. More precisely, my claim is that the way the question of subjectivity and that of inner experience are dealt with not only differently connects psychology and anthropology to transcendental philosophy, but also allows grasping the specific meaning of Kantian and Husserlian idealism. First of all, I shall briefly recall Kant's critique of the fourth paralogism, the paralogism of ideality, in his refutation of idealism in 1787. While evaluating the consequences of Kant's radically new manner of articulating inner and outer experience, I will show that it is possible to reply to some of Husserl's objections to critical philosophy. In effect, the way Kant conceives of the mutual dependency between internal and external experience allows measuring the distance that separates him from Cartesian idealism. It also counts among the reasons for which, deceiving Husserl's expectation to renew psychology on the ground of critical philosophy, Kant will elaborate and eventually publish a pragmatic anthropology for which the inner human being is inseparable from the outer human being. From the logical, I begin with this discussion of Husserl's critique of Kant. A brief recall of this critique. From the logical investigations to the crisis of European sciences, Husserl opposed to Kant some important objections. In his view, Kant remained imprisoned by some dogmatic presupposition, and mainly Kant's decision to restrain the validity of the categories as pure concepts of our intellect, both by limiting their application to the field of phenomena and by attributing them only to finite reasonable beings, that is, to us humans, is considered to be the effect of such presuppositions. But there is another critique, more discreet, that Husserl addressed to Kant, for instance, in his Crisis of European Sciences, paragraph 57, that of establishing a fatal separation, Verhängnisvolle Trennung, between transcendental philosophy and psychology. Husserl expresses indeed his astonishment that critical philosophy did not work out a better psychology. And at the same time, he confesses his own ambition of transforming psychology into a universal transcendental philosophy. The founder of phenomenology is undoubtedly conscious of transgressing a Kantian prohibition when he aims to restore in this fashion the connection between transcendental philosophy and psychology. Yet he considered that his project of an eidetic and ultimately transcendental psychology escapes this prohibition, which only concerns the dogmatic rational psychology of old-time metaphysicians. It is indeed true and surprising that while criticizing Kant's psychologization of the faculties of the mind, that which Husserl also calls Kant's supposed anthropologism, Husserl paradoxically maintains the alliance between transcendental philosophy and psychology that Kant had proclaimed impossible. In order to clarify Kant's controversial relationship to psychology, I will briefly examine the deconstruction of the fourth paralogism and the refutation of idealism, where, through the rejection of the supposed primacy of inner experience on outer experience, the specific profile of critical idealism is drawn. To begin with, it might be useful to recall the fact that while rewriting the paralogisms for the second edition of the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant makes a significant architectonic change in the structure of his work. The main condemnation of idealism that the first edition entrusted to the discussion of the fourth paralogism is now transferred from the transcendental dialectic to the transcendental analytic, where it follows the exposition of the postulate of actuality. This important modification suggests that Kant was far from being pleased with the manner in which he had initially solved the problem of idealism and felt the need to propose a genuine and plain refutation of idealism. In the first edition, the Critique of the Fourth Paralogism discusses the claim that the existence of all objects of outer sense is doubtful. But curiously, Kant is relatively clement toward the idealist position, as he admits that one can rightly assert that only what is in ourselves can be immediately perceived. Indeed, the idealist against whom he is arguing is not someone who denies the existence of external objects of sense, but rather someone who only does not admit that it is cognized through immediate perception. Otherwise said, this subtle idealism does not state the non-existence of the outer world, but only the fact that its experience or perception is inescapably immediate or indirect. Thus, idealism does not necessarily rhyme with acosmism, so to say, but can also take the shape of a potential and always imminent skepticism concerning outer experience and the outer world. The paralogism of ideality asserts the indirect and inferential character of our experience of exteriority and concludes that the existence of anything exterior to us is uncertain. In order to deactivate the idealist claim of our immediate and always indirect access to exteriority, Kant insists on the fact that the objects of outer sense are mere appearances and eventually mere representations. For this reason, external experience is not more immediate than internal experience, insofar as in both cases we have to do with representation, which are just as immediately present in me. Thus, the resolution of the four paralogisms in the first edition asserts that internal and external experience are equally immediate and certain. But this equivalency is defended by dissolving exterior objects within the immanent sphere of representation. Through the outer sense, I represent myself objects that are outside me, and yet their representation is in me. This argument, however, seems to involve the failure of any attempt to genuinely leave the sphere of immanence. As long as the object of internal sense is only regarded as my representation, the reality of the outer world, taken as existing outside me, will always ineluctably escape me. From this perspective, that which is immediately conscious is always a representation, be it internal or external. This is how the undoubted existence of the outer world is finally dissolved in the undisputed and immediate presence of its representation within me. At the end of the preface of the second edition, Kant confesses that the refutation of idealism is in fact the only veritable supplement of the second edition of the Critique. Its purpose, as Kant reminds it, is to provide a rigorous demonstration of the objective reality of the external sense. Undoubtedly, the first revolution of the fourth paralogism has mainly focused on the formal reality of my representation of exteriority. Should one adopt here the Cartesian vocabulary, like Kant did himself, and the distinction between formal reality and formal objective reality, of a representation. So, as I was saying, the first resolution of the fourth paralogism had mainly focused on the formal reality of my representation of exteriority, by asserting that every outer perception there immediately proves something actual, wirklich, in space, or rather is itself the actuality, das Wirkliche selbst. The actuality of exteriority was then mainly understood as the actuality of my representation of it. The first resolution of the paralogism of ideality evolved entirely within the sphere of representation. In return, the refutation of idealism added by the second edition, instead of pleasing itself with this first solution, attempts to make a step forward. As the footnote of the second preface that I already mentioned indicates, the ground of the refutation is not the field of appearances understood as representations, but that of the consciousness of existence. Having this in mind, it is easier to understand why the refutation is placed in the second edition of the Critique after the presentation of the postulate of actuality, Wirklichkeit, and also why Kant insists to distinguish in the same footnote of the 87 preface the representation of something persisting in existence from a persisting representation. Only the consideration of the objective reality of representations allows reaching their outer correlate and stating something about its existence. This is why the argument of the refutation of idealism will so much emphasize the actuality of that which is exterior to me. This argument goes even further insofar as it claims that without outer correlates of my representation, with or without an object exterior to me and yet given to me in space, the inner self itself the inner sense, itself could not properly function. That which is given through this sense would then be evanescent and remain inconsistent. The transcendental aesthetic already noticed that internal experience seems to embrace external experience. The novel contribution of the second edition of the Analytic in respect to the relation between inner and outer sense is to show that internal experience, far from being self-sufficient, is always associated with external intuitions. And ultimately, going even further than this acknowledgement of the equal certainty and immediacy of the representations provided by the inner and the outer sense, the second edition of the Critique subordinates internal experience to external experience. The mechanism of the refutation of idealism consists indeed in proving not only that the two are equally certain, but in the end, that the presumed priority and superiority of internal experience must be reversed. For it is only then that the idealist, who considers all exteriority as intrinsically doubtful, is completely defeated. The crucial argument of the refutation of idealism is the fact that only external objects can provide us with a representation of permanence, and that consequently the determination of my existence in time is possible only by means of the existence of actual things that I perceive outside myself. It is in this manner that Kant intends to turn against it, as he says, the game that the idealist plays, according to which, as seen previously, the only immediate experience is inner experience. Kant can speak here of a reversal, Umkehrung, insofar as his goal is precisely to prove that outer experience is really immediate. This dependency upon external intuitions does not concern the I think as a mere logical function, but only the temporal experience and existence of the I that presupposes a change in outer relations. Insofar as the inner sense cannot provide any representation of permanence, only the matter of external experience can possibly deliver anything that could correspond to the representation of a substance. Therefore, it is also the problematic status of the matter of internal experience or of its giving capacity that is here at stake. Thus, strictly speaking, for Kant, there are no immediate data of consciousness understood as genuine contents of internal intuition. The paradox of the inner sense is that it cannot really give anything, or rather that which is given through it is not really something or someone, for it is only a perpetual evanescent flow of representation. Consequently, for Kant, that which Husserl calls the originarily giving, originär gebende intuition, is rather the external intuition. This view results, of course, mostly from the second edition of the Critique, for in the first one, Kant would still assert that, quote, the thinking I is given to inner sense, likewise as substance in appearance. But such a generous interpretation of the giving capacities of internal intuition will not prevail for long. Quite the contrary, the second edition insists on the extreme poverty of the inner sense, and by doing so, reveals the indigence of internal experience itself. It is for this very reason that the refutation of idealism has the ultimate significance of an even more radical refutation of the substantiality of the soul, suggesting once again, and this is precisely the point that I most want to stress today, to what extent the destiny of idealism and that of psychology as a possible science are intimately connected in Kant. The lack of permanence in internal experience was already encountered within the first resolution of the paralogisms. Nonetheless, Kant's claim when he stated that in that which we call the soul, everything is in continual flux, was that in its very flowing, the temporal flux itself cannot be perceived, for time does not have the consistency of something permanent. Time is a mere form whose content constantly varies and which can never be grasped in itself. For this reason, self-intuition can never become a genuine self-cognition. The irreversible bankruptcy of rational psychology is even more virulently stated by Kant in the second version of the paralogisms. Since I do not cognize myself by being conscious of myself as thinking, therefore, through the analysis of the consciousness of myself in thinking in general, not the least is one, claims Kant, in regard to the cognition of myself as object. Given that all knowledge rests on an intuition, the mirage of a sheer reflexive self-cognition obtained solely through thinking needs to be dissipated. Furthermore, that which is given through the inner sense has no consistency when isolated from the representation of external objects. That is, it grants no access to a sphere of the absolute distinguished from that of the world or of outer objects or of outer objects, as merely relative and doubtful. Therefore, it is somewhat ironical that Husserl accused Kant of psychologizing the transcendental, while himself was restoring the view according to which internal intuition grants an access to an absolute. Quite the contrary, Kant's concern in his critique of the paralogisms and in the refutation of idealism was to carefully separate the transcendental and the psychological. This is how the specific relationship that Kant acknowledges between internal and external experience generates an infinite distance towards Cartesian as well as Husserlian idealism. Kant's critical endeavor implies, as he puts it, quote, keeping as close as possible to the transcendental and setting aside entirely what might here be psychological. Husserl, instead, in spite of his early critique of psychologism, does not put aside the project of a phenomenological psychology and pleads for a new perennial alliance between psychology and transcendental philosophy. And while at the very end of the Cartesian Meditations, he can significantly relaunch St. Augustine's famous invitation to explore interiority, quote, noli foras ire interredi in interiore hominis habitat veritas. So do not go outside, come back to yourself, for it is within the inner human being that truth dwells. By following Kant, one would rather have to praise the richness and resources of exteriority, as the anthropology from a pragmatic point of view, paragraph 24 does, quote, the tendency to retire into oneself, together with the resulting illusions of inner sense, can only be corrected if we are led back into the external world and so into the order of things present to the outer senses. In the time remaining, I will attempt to briefly evaluate the full significance of the fact that, instead of a transcendental psychology, Kant will only elaborate and eventually publish a pragmatic anthropology. As seen above, according to the first critique, when the surreptitious identification of the unity of thought with the object of inner intuition, that is, myself as given in time, is overcome, the whole of rational psychology, as a science transcending all the powers of human reason, collapses. The preface to the first metaphysical principles of the science of nature is equally severe towards empirical psychology, stating that it can never become anything more than, quote, an historical doctrine of nature, given that mathematics is not applicable to the phenomena of inner sense and their laws. This firm rejection of any form of scientific psychology, be it rational or a priorical or empirical, combined with the new way of understanding the relationship between internal and external experience, is reflected in Kant's alternative proposal of a pragmatic or post-critical anthropology, which brings together the inner and the outer human being. But what is then the relation between critical philosophy and pragmatic anthropology? In the introduction he wrote for his French translation, Michel Foucault advanced the hypothesis of a non-tropological critical repetition, suggesting that the anthropology from a pragmatic point of view is in fact, and in spite of appearances, deeply connected to the critical project. I will follow here this line of interpretation by stating that the relationship between the inner and the outer sense that resulted from the refutation of idealism determines the one that Kant's anthropology establishes between the inner human being and the outer human being. Indeed, the stake of the anthropology from a pragmatic point of view consists precisely in revealing the conditioning of the inner human being by the outer human being. And this also accounts for Kant's strong reticence towards a rehabilitation of psychology within transcendental philosophy. Shifting from psychology to anthropology means relying on an inner experience or a self-experience, which is always conditioned by outer experience, by the experience of the world and of humans as beings in the world. In effect, far from proposing a description of interiority, the anthropological didactic of the 1798 anthropology places the inner human being and the outer human being on the same level and categorically refuses any privilege to internal self-experience. Furthermore, on more than one occasion, Kant expresses his reticence towards the presumed richness of introspection or superiority of inner experience. Such is the case, for instance, in paragraph 4, in which he deals with self-observation, Selbstbeobachtung, and confesses, quote, that the real purpose of this section concerns the warning mentioned above, namely not to concern oneself in the least with spying the affected composition of an inner history of the involuntary course of one's thoughts and feelings. And a bit further on, Kant explains as follows, quote, for the situation with these inner experiences is not as it is with external experiences or objects in space, where the objects appear mixed next to each other and permanently fixed. Inner sense sees the relations or its determinations only in time, hence in flux, where the stability of observation necessary for experience does not occur. End of quote. It is, as one can see, the very argument of the refutation of idealism that Kant recalls here in his anthropology from a pragmatic point of view. Paragraph 4. Inner experience cannot provide us with the representation of permanence, and therefore it is profoundly dependent upon outer experience. But then, why does the anthropology inaugurate the approach of the human with the description of the I? As according to paragraph 1, the dignity of the human being is rooted in the fact of having the I, das Ich, in its representation. Let us not forget that this egological starting point is immediately amended by considering the potential deviations implied within this very capacity of saying I, ich, namely the different forms of egoism exposed in paragraph 2, logical, aesthetic, and moral egoism. And even if according to the remark of paragraph 7, the ecological problematic as such does not really belong to anthropology. Questioning the status and the value of the I is an efficient means for delimiting the domain of anthropology with respect to both psychology and to that which, within transcendental philosophy, pertains to logic. Kant draws indeed a clear line of demarcation. In quote, in psychology, we investigate ourselves according to our ideas of inner sense, in logic, according to what intellectual consciousness suggests. The error and the intrinsic insufficiency of psychology does indeed come as well from its failure to maintain such a distinction between the pure apperception and the inner sense. If Kant insists upon the necessity of separating them with such vehemence, he does so in order to delimit transcendental philosophy and transcendental logic in particular from the psychological approach that fails to distinguish the inner sense from pure logical consciousness. Nevertheless, this demarcation will not suffice to dissipate the difficulties of self-knowledge. As an important passage of Kant's Anthropology, paragraph 7, puts it, quote, knowledge of the human being through inner experience, because to a large extent one also judges other according to it, is more important than correct judgment of others, but nevertheless at the same time perhaps more difficult. For he who investigates his interior easily carries many things into self-consciousness instead of merely observing. In other words, end of quote. In other words, even when restrained in its pretensions and carefully distinguished from pure apperception, the inner sense remains unable to fulfill the promise of self-knowledge. This is the ultimate reason why the consideration of the inner human being has to be complemented by that of the outer human being in order to refrain from the propensity described by Kant, quote, to accept the play of ideas of inner sense as experiential cognition, although it is only a fiction. Nonetheless, pragmatic anthropology will not discredit that which is given through inner experience, but will approach it with a new attitude. While from the point of view of rational psychology, the mind is regarded as a special substance dwelling in the human being, the anthropological approach abstracts from the question whether the human being has a soul or not. The gemut, or human mind, that the anthropology deals with, just like the gemut of transcendental philosophy, does not belong to the domain of psychology, whether rational or empirical, for it is neither identical to the soul nor confined in the immanence of consciousness. This accounts for the meaningfulness of Kant's intention expressed within the first critique to transform empirical psychology into a complete anthropology, insofar as the anthropological approach refuses to objectify the data of internal experience and remains equally distant from the metaphysical rational psychology and from empirical psychology. Likewise, maintaining this reticence toward the psychological approach of the human, Kant's anthropology reveals the conditioning of the inner human being and of inner experience by the outer human being, which is also by the outer human being and by outer experience, which is also the experience of the world in a geographical, social, and cosmopolitan sense, and of humans as beings in the world. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Claudia, for your interesting presentation. It's very interesting because you give the title of transcendental anthropology, but you used to have the link with the psychology, and this is about me, the main point of interest of your talk. And well, because we put it together, this sciences, because Kant tried to put particular sciences to the transcendental test, and this to fail the test, but not as chemistry, which is considered by Kant as art, mere art, not science. About psychology and anthropology, we can speak. Anyway, they are not like physics, for example, which is much more stronger than psychology and anthropology. For this reason, in Opus Posthumum, he made the transition from metaphysical principles to physics, because physics is very relevant for human knowledge. And he dedicated a whole book in this period of between the two editions of the first critique to Metaphysische Anfangsgründe. She's a book about physics, about motion, about space, matter included in space, forces acting on matter, and the movement resulted. Then it's very interesting your relations between the both, but I have a problem in the critique of pure reason. Anyway, letting aside the problem of paralogism you made appeal to, but in general, the faculty of the soul are in fact a faculty of the thinking eye, as a matter of fact. And in this respect, the eye is very strong because he has knowledge. He initiates a process of knowledge. On the contrary, in Metaphysische Anfangsgründe, he is weak. You had the poverty of the eye, of the thinking eye. And because compared to the corporeality, metaphysics of corporeality, respectively to matter, space, forces, about which it's possible to say something meaningful. About the thinking eye, not too much. But my question is, did Husserl, in his critique on Kant, solve this problem, which is a very embarrassing one, with his internal intuition? You talk a lot about the pragmatic anthropology and this the Kant's turn from empirical psychology to pragmatic anthropology, and admired much your connection. But this is my problem. This is in fact my main problem. If Husserl succeeded in solving this problem of the thinking eye, this duality, strongness and weakness.
Thank you very much, Rodica. These are really excellent remarks. I will try to respond briefly. First of all, the problem that you are identifying, which regards transcendental anthropology, I have finally left it aside, but indeed it can be traced back to the famous, to one of Kant's famous reflections. I am thinking about the reflection where one finds the expression anthropologia transcendentalis, And what is very disturbing or intriguing in this reflection is that this idea of anthropologia transcendentalis appears as almost a synonym of the critical project, as the project of a self-knowledge of human reason. So the idea of an anthropologia transcendentalis seems to be very intimately connected to the very emergence of the critical project itself, even though, of course, it is not an idea that Kant fully developed. And I have not entered either into the debate, the scholar debate around the status of Kantian anthropology. One finds a rather Foucaultian line, so to speak, according to which the idea of a transcendental anthropology has to be taken seriously. It is, for instance, the case with the paper of Claudia Schmidt in Kant-Studien, I think. And on the other hand, we find more minimalist interpretations like the one of Reinhard Brandt, which insists on the empirical character of Kant's anthropology, that which, of course, insofar as it is empirical and even pragmatically oriented, does not have the status of a science. So it is quite obvious that in terms of grounding science and in terms of scientificity, anthropology and physics cannot compete. But the interesting question is indeed that when one asks the question of the subject of knowledge for physical knowledge, something like a self-reflection of reason reappears. So it is at this level indeed that Husserl, I think, attempts to give a response, even though Husserl's case is also complicated, because on the one hand, we have his official position is that of a neat separation between transcendental phenomenology and anthropology. It is the case in a famous 1931 conference that he gave, and which was a polemic intervention against Heidegger in particular, but also Scheller and Dilthey. But on the other hand, in his research manuscripts, there is, among his research manuscripts, there is in particular a very interesting research manuscript from the 30s, where anthropology is considered as a universal science, as a science that encompasses all sciences, is insofar as it is a science whose object interferes with the subject of knowledge. It is a science which has to deploy a specific form of reflexivity, or it is a science that invites us to a specific form of reflexivity towards oneself. And it is also in this context that Husserl himself crosses, without developing it, the idea of a transcendental anthropology. So I think that with this respect, and I will stop with this last answer, with this respect, Kant and Husserl's evolution are symmetrically opposed, even though Husserl departs from the philosophy of mathematics. He eventually, and I think the crisis of European sciences shows it, he goes in a direction that states the fundamental position of human sciences. This can also be seen in his conference on the crisis of humanity. So physics, Galilean physics, modern physics has to be reconducted to the self-knowledge process of human subjectivity, which cognizes itself as transcendental, whereas Kant and the opus posthumum that you have paid special attention to shows a somewhat opposite direction, according to which it is the physical object that becomes the undisputed paradigm of knowledge, even though knowledge has been transcendentally reconsidered as grounded, as ineluctably grounded in the cognizing subjectivity. I hope this answers your question.
Oh, very well. Thank you very much. Just a minute. You mentioned Heidegger. Maybe his design is a reconsideration of the seeking eye from his point of view. Maybe.
This is another debate. Perhaps I will leave it for another conference. Thank you very much.
Please. Karin de Boer.
Yes.
Karin.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you, Claudia, for your talk. I thought it was very interesting. And I agree with you that for Kant, it's really important to demarcate the different disciplines and in particular to separate transcendental philosophy from both psychology and anthropology. But I was wondering whether you think that Kant can completely succeed in this separation. Yeah, so I agree with you that what Kant is doing in the Critique of Pure Reason is not exactly transcendental psychology, but on the other hand, he needs to draw on insights acquired in psychology in some way. And to me, it's not very clear, to what extent he needs to draw on insights acquired in psychology, but it seems to me that the very relationship between, let's say, transcendental philosophy proper or transcendental critique on the one hand, and a more psychological investigation of the human mind, that this relationship is still kind of underdetermined, maybe in Kant's Critique of Pure Reason.
Thank you very much, Karin. I think that this remark fully joins, in my opinion, Husserl's critique of an Husserl, who was very perhaps more harsh in his evaluation when he speaks of a mythology of faculties in Kant, and he precisely points this unreflected, anthematicized psychological background of the Kant's analytic of knowledge. What it seems to me, though, it's that in spite of this, the two considerations are perhaps linked, but in spite of this, Kant's main mistrust is about the introspective method of psychology. So the strength that I see in his position is to consider that the access that we have to ourselves, the self-knowledge that we can have of ourselves, always has to associate the method, has to complement the method of psychology with a method of empirical outer observation. So this is perhaps the most, this is the anthropological perspective, which also explains perhaps which allows rather to develop the relation between anthropology and geography, for instance, of ethnography, a certain ethnography that can be found in Kant. So of course that I agree that the psychological background of the transcendental I can never be completely erased, but it seems to me that when it comes to self-knowledge, Kant's merit is that of of highlighting the limit of the introspective method, the limit of the method of psychology. But once again, this is also related to his to the priority, to the paradigmatic position of the physical object, because in order to appear as inconsistent, interiority has to be compared to the permanence of physical object. So in effect, this leads us back to Rodica's remark. It is also this this paradigmatic position of physics and of the physical object that grounds his deep mistrust towards psychology. Whereas with anthropology, this is an aspect that I haven't developed at all, but it would be interesting to develop. One of the interests of psychology is also the fact that, of anthropology is also the fact that with anthropology, perhaps the embodied existence, not only the human being as being in the world, as I put it, but also the human being as an embodied mind is recovered. And this is a perspective that psychology tends to leave aside.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Andrew Signal, please.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
And please not too long, because we have another
Okay, not
Laura as well. Excuse
not
me,
too
but
long. Okay,
the
thank
time
you.
is running.
Of course. Thank you for the really interesting paper. I'd like to read it, actually. There's a lot of interesting stuff. I just wanted to ask a basic question about the reading of the refutation that you presented. So it does look like there, in the refutation, there's some kind of priority of the outer to the inner in terms of epistemology and how we know things. But I've always had trouble understanding why people interpret Kant as saying that we can't apply the category of substance to the inner. So it looks like, just in terms of parity, all we get in outer experience is a series of states and features changing over time. What we get in inner sense is a series of states and features, some simultaneous, some changing over time. So why can't we just say it's a phenomenal substance in inner sense that has all of these features and states? It looks to me like there's a parity there that can't establish these radical claims that we get no substantial self in inner sense seem undermotivated.
Thank you very much for this question. What I would say is that perhaps this your position is close to the one that Kant defends in the first refutation of the paralogism of ideality. But in the refutation of idealism itself, for reasons that I have already mentioned, namely this privilege of the physical object as a paradigm for knowledge in general, we find this idea, which is the key argument of the refutation, that the representation of permanence can only be found outside us. And you are right to ask, to adopt like a standpoint of a more quantic physics and to say, well, in fact, there is no permanence, there is process, there is movement outside us as well as inside us. But of course, Kant's Newtonian physics was not would not support this view of what the physical phenomena are. But it is a meaningful objection, I think. Thank you.
Okay.
Laura Pellegrin, please. Laura, you have the microphone.
I would like to know, how do you see within the critique of pure reason the distinction between the human standpoint and the finitude standpoint? Particularly consider that some points and things are proper not only of human beings, but all finite beings. So I would like to know, how do you see this relationship?
Of course, this is a very important question. Thank you very much. Indeed, Kant invites us, especially in the second edition, because it is known, it is all, I think it is mostly in the second edition that he invites us to distinguish between the human cognizing subject and the rational finite being or finite rational being in general, which implies that a true meaning of variation, and which is a variation which is very important in the second transcendental deduction of the categories. By meaning of variation, we can imagine other configurations of finite intellects, finite sensibilities. This is a very important point. So it is an argument through which Kant overcomes the dual binary opposition of human and divine intellect, because he opposes the finite beings whose cognitive faculties can have various configurations, among which our contingent. It is also a claim of contingency, which is very important, I think, in the second transcendental deduction. This claim of contingency, this is our the configuration of our cognizing knowledge faculties on the one hand. So at the level of the finite rational being, we have a plurality of possible configurations. And this is how, in the end, the anthropological inscription of the transcendental can be relativized, so to say. So it's not an absolute one. So I agree with your remark. Of course, then one can always also reply that in spite of this imaginary demultiplication of the finite spirit through imagination, we have only one access to what finite knowledge is. That is the configuration of the human mind. So one has to maintain both, perhaps, but the distinction that you make is quite crucial. Thank you very much.
Thank you for very much, Claudia, and to our colleagues, which may entertain the discussion. And now comes Marius Augustin Dragici, our last speaker. He is senior researcher and head of the Department of Epistemology at the Institute of Philosophy and Psychology of the Romanian Academy, as well as director of the doctoral School of Philosophy and Psychology of the Academy, and scientific secretary of the Romanian Kant Society, and as well as author of our site. He's also founding member of the Romanian Society of Philosophy and associate member of the Romanian Committee for History and Philosophy of Science and Technology at the Romanian Academy. Please, Augustin, what is Francisco Iracheta?
Thank you very much, Professor Rodica Proitoru.
Thank you, Ka, for you.
Thank you. I will share my I will share.
You have the microphone, yes, and share your papers.
It works?
Yes.
It's a full screen, yes?
It's full screen, yeah, okay, it's okay. You can start.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
As the title suggests, my talk brings together two aspects of Kant's thought: his well-known appreciation for mathematics and the lesser-known so-called heuristic aspects of mathematics and of scientific experiment, mainly in his critical philosophy. It is well established that Kant's engagement with mathematics predates his inaugural dissertation. What is of particular interest here, however, is the period between the two editions of the Critique. In the first part, I will link the term heuristics, which I will treat in its straightforward classical sense as a method of solving problems, with the ancient mathematical methods of synthesis and analysis, and the fundamental problem of transcendental philosophy. I will argue that Kant's approach to mathematical methods is actually much deeper than it's usually been understood. I will not refer here to the Hintika-Friedman tradition, for example, but I will discuss the position from two texts of Zeliko Loparic, Kant's philosophical method. He is the author in which I found something similar to my own position regarding the influence of mathematics on the issue of transcendental philosophy, but only up to a certain point. Therefore, I will emphasize the important resemblance and differences between our positions and as well as the implications. In the second part, I will present my own perspective on the topic, and based on both perspectives, Lopari's and mine, I will only suggest that the two interpretations regarding the heuristic aspects of mathematical methods for solving the problem of transcendental philosophy raise questions not only about the concept of heuristics, but also about the connection between heuristics and methodology. Regarding the origin of the term heuristics, the concept wasn't used in ancient Greek, but we know that it comes from Greek heuriskeion, which means to discover or to find. Although the first thinkers who indirectly discussed heuristics were philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, who investigated how knowledge is attained through indirect methods such as meiotics, dialectics, or induction. However, the term heuristics was not explicitly used. The connection between mathematics and the fundamental problem of transcendental philosophy has been highlighted in a way that aligns more closely with my own position, as I mentioned by Loparic in his two texts. In these works, Loparic refers to George Polya's book, How to Solve It. This book is dedicated to the teaching methods of mathematics to students, or to the training of teachers and the presentation of mathematics to interested audiences. I will not refer to this. I will also not address Polya's positions regarding heuristics at this time, although it is said that he was the first to explicitly and distinctly articulate this concept. Polya invokes heuristics in a small chapter of his book dedicated to Pappus, and he was the first to make the association between the mathematical methods of analysis and synthesis and heuristics as a way of solving problems. Loparic claims that it is possible to look for the origins of Kant's philosophical method in the combined analysis and synthesis method of ancient Greek geometry. The combined method, consisting of proper analysis or transformation and resolution, and construction and proof, enabled the Greek geometers to solve both theoretical and construction problems. Loparic states that Kant used the same method, adapted and transformed to a certain extent during his critical period in order to solve the central problem of his transcendental philosophy, as presented in A Critique and Prolegomena. The old combined method of analysis and synthesis used by Greek geometers is briefly explained in Interpolation, Book 13, Proposition 1 of Euclid's Elements. However, the most complete description of it is found in Pappus' Collectio. Here I use the translation of Pappus' work by Thomas Little-Heath instead of the one by Hintika and Remes that Loparic used. Here we have the two definitions. Analysis from Euclid's Elements. Analysis is an assumption that which is sought as if it were admitted, and the passage through its consequences to something admitted to be true. On the other hand, synthesis is an assumption that which is admitted, and the passage through its consequences to the finishing or attainment of what is sought. These fragments are hardly intelligible. We have on screen Pappus' fuller account. Loparic sustained that the solution to the transcendental problem of how synthetic a priori propositions are possible relies on the synthetic and analytic methods of the ancient mathematics. Loparic says that though it seems impossible to place all of Kant's procedures under one general methodological scheme, there are good grounds to say that most tenets of both his speculative and practical philosophy were established by the method of analysis and synthesis adapted from Greek geometry. This way of viewing Kant's royal road to philosophy sheds new light on the structure of the problems he was solving, as well as on the natural order and dependence of his argument. Loparich adapted the text from Papus, translated by Heath, through the lens of Polia's paraphrasing, which was shaped by Polia's research interests. To facilitate the teaching of mathematics by making it more attractive, Polia divided the method of analysis into problem to prove and problem to find. Loparich adopted this distinction from Polia instead of the original one, which is between theoretical analysis and problematic analysis, progressive, respectively regressive. Before presenting Loparich's position, let us look at 3 additional fragments from the critical period and from Kant's lectures on logic. I agree with Loparich that Kant, even from the period of the prize essay, was aware of the Newtonian method and the appropriate one for his critical project, which had yet to be born. Here are 2 fragments from prize essay. I agree here with Loparich that the method recommended by Kant consists of following 3 rules. Firstly, start with certain experiences. Secondly, search for rules like principles that allow you to derive these experiences. Thirdly, employ these rules, principles, in constructing explanation for other, more complicated empirical events. My comment here is that in this fragment, we have in Nuce one of the definitions of the transcendental deduction of space from B critique. We now see that also in the lectures on logic taught by Kant, published at his request in 1800, the position regarding the 2 methods is similar. I agree here with Loparich that there can be no doubt that the 2 methods distinguished and opposed by Kant are the first and the second half of the combined method of analysis and synthesis. In separating them, Kant follows a use which can also be noted in the quotation of Newton's description and which goes back to ancient mathematicians. Regarding the order, Loparich says that most Greek geometrical texts skip the analytic part of proofs and start immediately with what is called the progressive method or the method of composition or synthesis. This is an issue that I'll try to discuss later on. I will try to show that Loparich is missing here the prolegomena and B critique perspective. So I'm not agree with Loparich in saying that Kant's description of the 2 methods is rather vague about various issues. He says that the given starting point is left unspecified. So one may be doubts as to whether Kant is thinking of problem to prove or problem to find. I emphasize that Kant doesn't use this distinction. Also, Loparich sustains that it is not established whether the way upwards is reversible or not. Nothing is said about the nature of conditions aimed at in analysis. And the opposition between the direction of regression and of progression is not made precise, nor is the synthetic way down. In my interpretation, I will offer a different account regarding these issues. As for the order of the methods, Loparich refers to a passage from Kant in the Transcendental Dialectic, sustaining that the first is the analytical method. As I will show later, the order is rather reversed, sustained not only by certain Kantian assertions, but also by an underlying structure that validates this order. The fact that in dialectics, the analytic method appears to be more suitably adapted relates to the different theoretical status of transcendental dialectics. In transcendental analytics, everything had to begin absolutely pure without any external inference. And once the task of transcendental analytic was achieved, the method within transcendental dialectics could adopt the opposite sense, namely, as it had already been demonstrated in transcendental analytic, that theoretical knowledge cannot transcend the boundaries of possible experience. My view is based on my interpretation of the deduction of the categories from the volume, the experiment of pure reason, Kantian deduction of the categories, and the article Kant on metaphysics as science. Today, I also provide a reconfiguration and an update of certain elements. My first remark is that the fundamental problem of traditional metaphysics, the problem of transcendental philosophy, and the link of these problems to the two methods discussed above must be put in the framework of the Kantian theoretical project that aims to reform the traditional metaphysics and to put it on the safe path of science. In terms of the B preface, namely, these issues will be finally discussed in the frame of the experiment of pure reason developed here by Kant. The second remark is that the need to reform metaphysics and to put it on the safe path of science is closely related to the unsatisfactory situation of traditional metaphysics and of the method of metaphysics as Kant sustained in the B preface of the critique, and to his constant fascination with the model of certainty provided by the exact sciences, pure mathematics and pure physics. The third remark, what supports what I will show later is less known, even in the Kantian exegesis, is that only in Prolegomena, in the B edition of the critique, we find the idea of metaphysics as science. Until that moment, the critical project managing only around the idea of reform. This crucial remark states that importance of the results of Prolegomena and of the role here and in big critique of pure mathematics and pure physics, as well as the two methods developed in the three Kant's works. Kant didn't understand his approach as a critique of books and systems, but as a critique of the faculty of reason in general in respect of all the conditions after which reason might strive independently of all experience. And hence, the decision about the possibility or impossibility of a metaphysic in general and the determination of its sources as well as its extent and boundaries, all, however, from principles. As we saw earlier, from principles emphasize this synthetic character from top to bottom of the synthetic method to establish the categories in the A critique. In the Prolegomena, Kant changes his standpoint on the transcendental method of the deduction from A critique, adding to the synthetic way the analytical one from bottom up, and giving up the two-step deduction from A, the objective and the subjective deductions. We will return on this. Given that the elaboration of synthetic a priori knowledge takes place outside metaphysics, in pure physics and pure mathematics, Kant consider it necessary for the model of certainty of knowledge in the pure sciences to play an important role in the structure and content of B critique theory. In the Prolegomena, this model was dealt with according to the analytical method, and Kant reached the same results as in his A critique, where he used the synthetic method. Kant took the results and the method of the Prolegomena, integrated them in the structure and the content of the theory of B critique, conceived as experiment of pure reason. The model of this investigation is built in Prolegomena according to the analytical method and represents a different way to reach the same results of the A critique. This way considers, first of all, the general method, which here is analytical, and assumes a path that starts from the certain results of the pure sciences and moves to the investigation of the possibility that should lead, by rational generalization, to the determination of the conditions of possibility in general for any theoretical reporting to object. Of course, this result structure of possibility is none other than that of the pure a priori force, that of the categories, and of the principle in the E edition, which underlie all of our experience knowledge and synthetic a priori knowledge. In this way, Kant sought to justify the validity of the categories by this process that he considered necessary for his approach in the Prolegomena. Here, Kant asks the general question of the Prolegomena: how is synthetic knowledge possible through pure reason? Based on the distinction between synthetic and analytical judgments, the question leads to the reform of metaphysics to solve the general problem of pure reason, summarized in another question: how are synthetic a priori judgments possible? These are not to be found in the dogmatic metaphysics only as antinomies. These are to be found, but we have such knowledge in pure sciences. So the general question of the prolegomena, how is synthetic knowledge possible through pure reason, has as answer to synthetic a priori judgments from pure mathematics and pure physics. For the next remark, for the quote posted now, I only emphasize here that these sciences, while bringing light to higher questions regarding their common origin, they simultaneously provide occasion for a better explanation of their own nature. And another sentence, neither science had need of the aforementioned investigation for itself, but for another science, namely metaphysics. It's a sentence from Prolegomena. My remark here is, here explicitly appears that connection I set forth with what I have said about regarding the need to transformation metaphysics into science. The common origin of pure sciences is nothing but the pure a priori structure of the categories and the pure forms. The deduction of these sciences was not necessary for them because they are obvious, but for a higher question that I think to be that of the possibility in general of any science and of metaphysics itself, grounded on the pure a priori structure that needed confirmation by revealing the same structure that also underlies pure a priori sciences. What is also the achievement of the Prolegomena? Proceeding from principles and completely a priori in the first edition of the critique, Kant realized that he needed a construction apart from the critique to verify whether the ground of pure sciences, where pure a priori judgments are found, is the same a priori structure of possibility, the same categories and pure a priori forms. For this, he proceeded to the deduction starting analytically from the reality of these judgments and discovering the same a priori structures. These results had to be integrated into a new theory, that of the big critique, which would also contain this vein that became necessary with the Prolegomena. The structure of the new theory of the big edition is thematized by Kant in its preface as the experiment of pure reason. Regarding this experiment, the change in the way of thinking in metaphysics, which has previously been a mere fumble, must follow and imitate what happens in science. Imitating the model of sciences, Kant set forth his own experiment based on shifting the hypothesis at the level of metaphysics. Intuition does not follow the properties of objects, but they are orientated in accordance to the pure a priori intuition and the categories. So, in big critique, the experiment of pure reason is analogous to the experiment of modern science, but instead of objects, it works with the pure reason itself, an experiment that necessarily incorporates the synthetic method, the analytic method, as the experimental part, and the results of the Prolegomena. The success of the deduction of the categories and of pure a priori form guarantees the correctness of the distinction between phenomena as things in themselves, and at the same time justifies the right path of pure sciences. This result is achieved by including in its fundamental methodological strategy both ways of demonstrating the validity of the same pure a priori form, synthetically from pure reason and analytically from the possibility of synthetic a priori judgment of pure mathematics and pure physics. I will now finally focus on discussing the term heuristics within the context of the analysis presented. Heuristics is a subject often approached from certain perspectives as a potential source of errors that must be corrected and continuously checked. This endeavor tends to complicate the relationship between heuristics and methodology. However, the same heuristics cannot be denied the quality of being a source of inspiration. But what is its status in relation to methodology? The general characteristics employed in these approaches would be as follows. Heuristics do not rely on a solid or fully demonstrated theoretical foundation. They provide practical and efficient solutions, often based on experience or intuition, without guaranteeing absolute correctness. Heuristics have limited applicability to specific contexts and are not necessarily universal. This process is often implicit, relying on informal judgments and tends to prioritize optimization, speed, and the use of shortcuts to reach that good enough solution in a short amount of time. Methodology is based on a solid theoretical foundation, on the other hand, and is rationally and logically justified. It has a universal character, being applicable across different contexts and providing solutions that are verifiable and reproducible. Methodology is explicit and clearly articulated, with each step documented and supported by clear arguments. It follows a rigorous process without shortcuts and prioritizes the accuracy and the validity of solutions, even if this means a longer process. My talk today can be considered from this perspective as follows. Considering these results, it can be said that there is a difference between what Kant explicitly asserts about methods in the methodology of the critique, for example, and what we can say about the methodology of Kant's transcendental research in general, and about the heuristic aspect of mathematics within its transcendental program, including the methodology part. Simply put it, both Loparich and I have shown that heuristic character of mathematics in Kantian transcendental philosophy, which consists in the influence of the two methods of geometers, or as observed in B edition of the critique, of this method and or of the pure sciences in general. This involves the transformation and adaptation of the two methods, analytical and synthetical, within the experiment of pure reason in order to successfully verify the fundamental hypothesis that we relate to phenomenized objects and not to things in themselves. If we complicate matters a bit, it becomes very difficult or almost impossible to assert that this was the heuristics of mathematics in Kantian transcendental philosophy. The two perspectives that of Loparich and my own attest to this, although they are closely related. Loparich interprets Kant's critique as a genuine transcendental semantics with a strong connection to the way the relationship to objects is understood through the reconfiguration of Kant's concept of significance of the categories, unlike my view, which attempts to show that the transcendental philosophy in the B critique is a second-order theory, a framework theory, where the two mathematical methods are transcendentally redesigned within the experiment of pure reason. However, it is well known that there are many solid interpretations of the classics regarding the relevance and influence of mathematics on Kant, which do not align with either Loparich's position or what I have attempted to articulate. This does not mean, however, that they cannot be considered some finding a certain path by being present in other research in a more or less modified form, depending on research interest and other aspects related to the interpreter and perhaps the context. This talk is also an experiment that shows that heuristics involves more subtle elements than is often believed in general. Loparich's interpretation led him to a particular perspective based on the heuristic aspect of mathematics in Kant, while the same aspect led me to a different interpretation of the same text. The same has occurred with Kant, but this simply means that if it is heuristic, heuristics simply produce knowledge, both through different interpretation and through the development of other perspectives, not just by association and analogy. Just as for Kant, the model of pure a priori sciences, especially that of mathematics, produce a perspective on the problem of pure reason, for Kantian scholars, it produced different perspectives on the type of Kantian research program. In our case, a transcendental semantics on one hand, and a second-order theory or a framework theory on the other hand. Given the results above, but not solely because of them, I believe that a reconsideration of the heuristic methodological relationship is necessary. I think one of the features that should be taken into greater consideration is a non-reductionist manner is the aforementioned maxim that heuristics simply produce knowledge, but by different interpretation and by the development of other perspectives, not just through association and or analogy. Indeed, the first pertains to the context of discovery, while the second pertains to the context of justification and verification. I merely underline the ambiguity of the concept of heuristic starting from the Kantian context under analysis above, and only sketching a particular position regarding the differences and the roles of heuristics and methodology within the broad field of philosophical and scientific knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Augustine, for your presentation. And well, you showed the mathematics Kant uses throughout his period of from pre-critical philosophy to post-critical philosophy. Do you believe that there is here a continuity or a discontinuity between, I believe that in some respect, regarding what Kant did say expressly in the Critique of Pure Reason, that is the putting face to face of the mathematical knowledge and philosophical knowledge, and showing that they are different. And after that, in the same period, the period in Metaphysischen von Gründe, that every science should include mathematics because the scientific characters depend on it. I used to have a discussion at the Congress of Bonn, recent Bonn Congress, with Daniel Sutherland, who sustains that there is a continuity in Kant's position concerning mathematics. What do you believe in this respect?
Thank you for the question. As we saw, a detail which is surprising is that in a work long before the critical period, Kant assumes the same understanding regarding those two methods. This is something that that tells us that he was interested in this type of thinking regarding the problem of metaphysics for a long time, for a very long time, and more of that, he doesn't renounce of these two types of methods. Moreover, he worked on them constantly, reaching, in my opinion, only in B critique the maturity of his project, because there both methods are present in even in the transcendental deduction, and works in a way that contribute to success of the deduction on one hand, and on the validity regarding his hypothesis. So I think this is a strong point regarding the continuity in attention with mathematics in his philosophy. Regarding the moment of Metaphysischen von Gründe, of course, that reconstruction of natural science is a level, is on the different level theoretically, comparing with the critiques of pure reason. So from that point of view, I think that Kant was straight regarding these different levels of theoretizing, So this is my answer.
Yeah, thank you for this. That what we can keep from your presentation is that the scientific character of metaphysics depend on mathematics, isn't it? So to sum up, at least
this is
see,
more.
us can see.
This
Yes.
is more complicated problem because
Yeah, it is.
we
It
have
is.
to get in Kant's philosophy
Because
of
metaphysics
mathematics.
is different throughout Kant's work. Yeah.
Yes, and there is an issue here in terms of the power of mathematical instruments regarding the on one hand the necessity to reduce the metaphysics, and on the other hand to be careful with the mathematical categories here. So it is more than a question which can reach the answer from me here.
Yes, okay. Then to pay attention to the
Yes.
method. This is the problem with the physics. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For your presentation, and I thank to the three speakers who did excellent presentation. Karin, excuse me.
Well, sorry, maybe there are some other questions. Yes, I think that we should take some time.
I didn't see hand raised, and for this reason I concluded. Have you questions?
Yes, but if there is someone else who hasn't just asked a question.
You have 2 minutes more. Yes, if you has. I have not seen.
Okay, so so Marius, thanks for your talk. I thought it was very rich, maybe a bit too rich for my very limited finite standpoint. But I was struck by your claim that Kant's presentation of the critique of pure reason in the B preface, in terms of an experiment of pure reason, is based on a really new insight. Yes, that wasn't there in the first critique, and that he developed through the prolegomena. Because I'm not sure that I agree with this view that there is a kind of radical change in terms of his understanding of what he was doing in the Critique of Pure Reason, and I'd rather take his reference to the experiment as a different way of presenting the project, rather than a different or an account of a real difference. Because it seems to me that already in the first edition, Kant took the antinomy of pure reason to somehow indirectly prove the main point of transcendental idealism, namely that we need to distinguish between appearances and things in themselves, yes, or noumena. And so the antinomy of pure reason is already presented as a proof of that assumption. And so I would take the talk of an experiment of pure reason to be much more superficial and just a way maybe of making the project more attractive or clearer to certain readers. What's your view on this?
Yes, I have not tell that it is a radical different theory in B critique. What I try to say is that in B critique, the fundamental nucleus of critique was restructured, like transcendental deduction, and in B critique are to be found the results of prolegomena, and in B critique we have, in my view, the solution of the problems of deduction in a critique. And these all elements that are very fundamented in my book and in some articles, and states that big critique is the mature theory of critique, not because it's a different perspective, but is a valid perspective, and shows that the type of the theory of big critique is much coherent and is a type of second order theory. And in this mature form, many of the problems that we faced in a critique and prolegomena and so on are finding their solutions. This is what I try to say, but it's not enough time to get in into details.
Yes,
I will try to translate my work to publish it, and I hope I will succeed soon. That.
Well, then I look forward to reading the English version. Thank you very much.
Yes, I agree with its importance that is a grown-up, mature version of the critique, the second edition, because in Prolegomena is much more emphasized the experimental side. He comes here with judgment of perception and so on, not on the mathematical side of the process of knowledge. It's okay. Have you other questions?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Other question we have or not? We finish? Then we can finish. Thank you very much. Ah, you have. Luis, please.
Yes, so thank you, Rodica. Yeah, it's just a short question, Marius. Thank you for your presentation. It was very, very interesting, and I wished also I had more time to go through the slides, but we have the recordings. I can watch it again and try to grasp everything that you're saying. And I also look forward to the translation. I was just wondering, so you emphasize a lot the role of mathematics in the critique, and I think this is very interesting. And I was just wondering, to what extent do you think that Kant's distinction between philosophical cognition and mathematical cognition in the doctrine of method could somehow pose a challenge to this kind of approach that emphasizes the role of mathematics there? Because he makes this distinction between cognition from concepts and cognition from construction of concepts. And philosophy cannot construct. So I don't know whether you think that this could pose a challenge to your reading, and if not,
no.
Yeah.
On contrary, this distinction is valid in big critique, in my interpretation as well. But what is interesting here is that the idea of construction leads Kant to a particular perspective regarding mathematics and validity. This, I think, is one of the idea that wasn't enough developed. Because as we know, mathematical intuitionism is one of the major reality in philosophy of mathematics, if I may say that, and their roots are in Kantian constructivism. Even Brouwer witnessed this idea, and what is more interesting is that in Kant we have also the construction method and the formalist method. So I thought a lot about this situation, and I think this is a way of reproject what's happening today with the two forces of mathematics in artificial intelligence, programming, etc. Because today we have much more power of calculus on these devices and tech. So the constructivist perspective is more present, and we don't know yet what it comes in this area. So I think these two ideas are very fruitful for the future in this kind of researches. I don't know if I answered your question, but it leads me your question to that comment.
For the moment, it works. It works. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For our host, who organized that conference, a series of conferences, and thank you for our speakers and for their discussion, for our friends and colleagues who came to support us, and we expect to have other conferences. Well, to enjoy of them. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much, Radhika.
In 2 weeks, isn't it?
Yeah, so thank you so much, Radhika. It was a very interesting session, and I think we learned a lot from the discussion and for putting it together. So I just want to mention that I just posted here the schedule on the chat, the schedule of the VKC. And the next session will be exactly in 2 weeks, and it will be curated by Argentina and Chile, so the Kant groups of both countries. And we are very much looking forward to it, and you're all warmly invited to join us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I would just